Hello, Jeff Zwerink here again with Give and Take. This is the segment of our show where we explore challenging and interesting scientific ideas to see how they interact with the truth of Christianity. Today we're joined by Sue Dykes, a paleontologist, and we're going to investigate whether hominids actually buried their dead. Sue, it's good to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
So this is a topic that seems to impinge on whether hominids were actually humans, because the idea of burying your dead has that kind of symbolic, kind of uniquely human attributes to it. So yes. I know you've had some chance to investigate this. What evidence is there, or what evidences do people put forth that these hominids actually did bury their dead?
Well, in the case of Neanderthals, for instance, there are certain aspects of a burial site which lead the researchers to believe that this might have been burial goods or some sort of proof that there was a ritual to that. But
so this wasn't just a whole bunch of hominids stacked up. It's like there's something else that indicated they were intentionally buried?
Yes, but then in all of the cases, it's not undisputed. It's very often when you pan out and you have a look at the wider area, you see these horns strewn around all over the site for many hundreds of meters. And so taking just the horns that are around this particular skeleton and calling that grave goods, obviously then becomes a bit...
So there's evidence, or there's some kind of ambiguous evidence or disputed evidence.
Yes,
I know
it's in the positioning of the body. It's in whether the skeleton is complete. That sometimes leads people to think it was a deliberate burial.
Okay.
Sometimes, in some cases, for instance, I know Fuzz has discussed pollens that are found in amongst the bones, which they have been proven not to be of great age. They're modern stuff.
Okay.
And in South Africa, where I've originated from, we've recently had another discovery of it's seemingly quite a recent hominin called Hominid. People might have heard of it.
When you say recent, what do you mean by recent?
Well, we're talking about 330 to 200 and possibly as early as 250 something thousand years ago.
So a couple 100,000 years ago, so whereas humanity is kind of on the scale of 100,000 years. So that okay, all right.
Yeah.
So that is
and
fairly
many
recent.
Believe, 200,000 and potentially pre-modern humans, even 300,000. So more or less the same time as other hominins are being called the root of modern humans.
And so from an evolutionary perspective, this is something you would expect if these hominids were becoming human or evolving to humanity, you would expect to see this transitional type behavior of burying dead, things like that, correct?
Yes.
So what do we find when we look at this Homo naledi evidence?
Yes. In fact, in 2013, the first discoveries were made, and all of the material was found in a terminal cave.
Terminal meaning?
Meaning at the very end of the cave system. They're very, very complicated systems.
Okay.
And then when you get down and you can't go any further, there's no more exits and entrances. That's a terminal cave. It's
so that
blocked
would imply there's an intention about getting to the back of it or something like that,
That's
presumably?
what the researchers claimed.
Okay.
There's a huge rockfall that covers the sort of entrance to this cave, and it's difficult to get into.
Okay.
And the fact that there were so many full skeletons, well, more or less full, and the fact that they were the only species found in that cave, led the researchers to propose the idea that this was an intentional burial. I know when I spoke to Professor Berger when he produced this work, and he was almost hinting at ritual burial, but then he said he will tone down the way he puts it to make it intentional burial. But then, having said that, he then went on to sort of claim quite a lot of potential use of language, potential use of symbolic thought and tool making and that sort of thing.
Okay, so as we look at the evidence, there is this evidence of intentional, purposeful, or even ritual burial.
In the case of Hominids, when you have a ritual burial or you have an intentional burial, especially in something that's, quite heavily into the dark zone of a cave system, one would assume that along with that would have to come some sort of evidence of use of light.
Okay.
And so, to my knowledge, there is no evidence of that yet at all.
Well, so
And you
obviously
would
we
have
don't have
seen
flashlights. What do you mean by use
by
of light?
use of fire, use
okay.
of torches.
So there's no charcoal, burned wood, or anything like
and
that.
And the route to get to this terminal cave should theoretically be covered with charcoal on as the torches were burning off, and there's nothing. To have claimed tool use now in the latest papers, you would expect to see some sort of associated tools. There was absolutely no sign of habitation in this cave. It was almost as though these individuals had run into the cave and perhaps become trapped there.
Okay.
And in actual fact, in the original geological paper, the death profile or the age profile of the individuals that they found were predominantly sort of young adults and late adolescents. And there was only one aged member, and there were a couple of infants, one infant and a few juveniles. So it looks like the age profile of a normal sort of group, a family group.
Not like the one of where you've been burying the dead as they age or pass away.
Yes, you would think it should be predominantly older members, ill people who are ill, people who didn't survive their childhood. So maybe some very, very young, some very, very old. And I know Professor Berger will probably say, well, what about in the case of war or that sort of thing? It's going to be your adults. And there will always be a reason why it could be. But the thinking around that claim, it was based on very, I would say, not such strong evidence. It was based on the fact that was the only species, and they believed that this cave had been used several times by the same species. So it's actually quite a strong claim without a great deal of evidence. They did actually put into their paper that they weren't ruling out a catastrophe of some sort. And we do know that the huge chunk of rock in front of that cave was a rockfall, massive rockfall. So perhaps that could account for why the bodies were there. And since that time, they've found bodies around the side of that rockfall and in another cave, another cavern in that cave system. So it doesn't look as though that was a chosen burial site. It seems now that, we're finding remains everywhere in the system, or not everywhere, but many places.
I find this to be a common event where scientists will make claims that the record shows that what Scripture says is not correct. But as we dig into the details, we find that, lo and behold, Scripture really does give us an accurate picture. In this instance, there's the claim that humanity is not exceptional, that other hominids buried their dead. But as we dug in deeper, there's reason to be very skeptical of that claim, and that the evidence that humanity really is exceptional, that only we do those practices. This is something that my colleague Fuzz Ramana has written extensively about, and I would encourage you to go check out his book, Who Was Adam?, to be equipped to talk about this topic and be able to challenge people and show people that humanity really is exceptional and that the Bible does give an accurate description of who we are and how we relate to God.